Good morning. Welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Policy Session on January 11, 2023. Happy birthday, sis. It's my sister's birthday today. Yes. Gary, Administrator Gary Schmidt, what's up?
Thank you, Chair Smith. First, Commissioner Schrader is attending a National Association of Counties event today, will not be present, but all other commissioners are present. Your first policy session is 2022 Federal Legislative Agenda Update. Sue Hildick, Director of Public and Government Affairs, will kick it off, and we have our partners from Summit Strategies, the county's federal lobbying firm. Go ahead, please, Sue.
Good morning, Commissioners. This morning we want to bring you up to speed on our federal lobbying and advocacy efforts, and they've been very strong in the last year, so we have good news to report. One of your 5 priorities is restoring and maintaining public trust, and so we like to have Summit Strategies come and demystify the federal process and make sure the public understands what we do at the federal level through their good partnership. So we're thrilled to have Hal and Mark here today and other members of the team who are in the room. And Hal, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate it. And Chair Smith and Commissioners, pleasure to be here. We work for you. And so we're here to talk about ways that we do that for you in Washington, D.C., as well as here. So Mark and I are based in Washington, D.C., as you know, and Michelle and Jake are based here in Portland and go back and forth. So we purposely set up our firm that way so that when we represent Oregon interests, we can be close on the ground and really understand what your needs and issues are, as well as then represent them as well as we can in Washington, D.C. And we, as Sue said, we have great news this year. I think you all probably have received the packet of kind of a summary of those actions over the last year in your commission packets. And the best news to report are the $4 million for the Hillside Manor redevelopment project, a housing project in Clackamas County, and a $2 million earmark, or now it's called congressionally directed spending, but it's easier to say earmark, for the Boring Lagoon, which we actually renamed the Clackamas River Watershed Protection Project, because Boring Lagoon sounded like a bad movie, and we weren't getting any traction on it. And when we renamed it the Clackamas River Watershed Protection Plan, it actually sold to Congress a little easier. But that was very exciting, because that is $6 million that's coming directly to Clackamas County. And you'll remember that last year, we, on behalf of the county, had been advocating for $6 million in funding for the Willamette Falls Locks project. And that money was allocated to the project, but that went to the Army Corps of Engineers. It benefits the county, but it didn't come directly to the county. It didn't affect your bottom line necessarily. And this $6 million does. So that's very exciting. And happy to say that the $4 million congressionally directed spending for Hillside was among the highest projects in the whole state. There are about 5 projects that are in that $4 to $5 million range. So $4 million was right at the top. And then the rest of the projects in the statewide, for similar kinds of efforts, are more in the $1 to $2 million range. And just to give you a sense of how that relates to the rest of the Tri-County area, Washington County got 0 congressionally directed spending projects directed to the county. Multnomah County got 1 for $2 million, and Clackamas County got 6 for 2 projects. So you did well.
Thank you for your advocacy for us and all your hard work. Commissioner Schrader and I flew back in September, one of the first in-person visits, I think, since COVID, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And along with Trent Wilson and Chris Lyons, our local lobbyists, and everybody was so helpful. It was really an all-hands-on-deck effort that made this happen. And Martha and I just show up as the mouthpiece. That's all we did. And so it was because of all your hard work. And then Martha Commissioner Schrader met with Senator Merkley out at Hillside Manor. I believe along with Senator Wyden, they both visited and looked at the redoing of that housing, one of the oldest housing projects in the state of Oregon. We repurpose it and we'll add more units and go forward with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, and I do want to really point out that Chris and Trent were strong advocates here at the local level with your congressional staff at the local level and helping set up those kinds of tours for Senator Merkley, Senator Wyden, and Congressman Schrader at the time. And those kinds of outreach efforts are so critical because otherwise it's just kind of noise in the on the edges. But getting them to really understand what the issue is and why an extra $4 million is really going to put that project forward and help
I was
it
very
happen.
happy to see both United States senators visit Clackamas County project. I know when I'm invited to go out and see projects that I don't know about, it's just a whole change of your perception on what's going on. And we do that quite regularly here. All the commissioners do. Travel around the county to see what's going on outside the county. And seeing is believing, but thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. I understand from the county administrator that we have all the time in the world, so now I'm going to read the 14-page memo that
That's
I
a joke,
sent.
right now? It's a sense of humor, sarcastic humor. Yeah.
No, what we're going to do is very briefly, Mark and I are going to go through the 6 points of kind of priority for the county and just give you a very couple of sentence update on each of those. And so I'm going to turn next to Mark to talk about Willamette Falls and the resource-related priorities.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Alan. Really appreciate being here to see you all in person today. I was supposed to be here last year when Hal was here to brief, and our flight got canceled because of snow and I think just general Alaska Airlines pilot shortage issues around there. So it's great to be here in Clackamas County on a great January day. So happy to see you all in person. Like Hal mentioned, we're kind of just going through the executive summary, kind of the main priority projects and priority emphasis of priority for the county. One of those is with regard to Willamette Falls locks. This has been a project that I've worked on for more than 20 years in my career, from being on Capitol Hill to my time representing Clackamas County, both at Baljanik and since at Summit Strategies. It's something we continue to work with the delegation on. Like Hal alluded to, there was $6.2 million last year for the Corps for the repair on that. It continues to be a priority. We continue to kind of take you all's direction to advocate and do what we can on behalf of the county on the locks, working within the region. One of the kind of main things, I mean, Clackamas County is a big kind of natural resources county. It's majority owned by the federal government. There's a lot of forest land, agriculture, a lot of natural resource issues here. That is always a priority for us, working on you all's behalf, and it has kind of continued to be so. The 2 items that were on the federal agenda this past year that we've kind of worked on is another long-time project for me was Secure Rural Schools. And kind of those timber issues, continue to work on that on behalf of the county, trying to make sure we continue to provide our delegation with the information that they need to sell to their colleagues, because they're all united in support of trying to help out Oregon's rural counties, the information that they need in order to sell to their colleagues why it's important to reauthorize SRS, why it's important to kind of continue these programs going forward. So that has happened. We'll continue to take our direction from you all on that, but it's SRS was reauthorized last Congress, and it will need to be reauthorized again before the end of this Congress if there's going to be funding through that program to continue going forward. So we'll keep kind of working with you, keep working with the delegation on that issue. The other kind of natural resource issue that was on this list was with regard to Mount Hood recreation access, issues of that sort. We, along with Trent and Chris, worked closely with Congressman Blumenauer on his Mount Hood recreation bill. Provided, throughout the process, Blumenauer's office worked with us, submitted, draft language. We worked with county staff in order to provide comments back to Congressman Blumenauer. That bill was introduced late during this last Congress, so there was no action taken at the federal level. That will continue to be, again, something that we, will, taking our cues from you all, we'll work with Blumenauer and we'll work with the rest of the delegation to try and do things like that legislation or to increase recreation and access in Mount Hood.
So flipping back to the three other issues that are on your, the top 6 priority issues for the county, one of those is housing and human services. And of course, our advocacy on your behalf and your whole staff, the advocacy for Hillside was really the way that is most clearly manifested, I think, in success, because that project will go forward now and be able to have as many low-income or market rate housing units as possible because of that $4 million federal investment. Human services programs, those are more general, just making sure that the congressional delegation understands the importance of the human services programs and the way that the county implements them and the federal funding that's needed to carry those out. Most of that funding tends to, go to the state and then get passed down to the local government. It doesn't come directly necessarily to the government or to the local government, but we want to always make sure that the delegation understands what it really means on the ground here. And when you get a $2 million allocation or a $200,000 allocation, how many people are being served with those kinds of human services dollars? And that's a story that I think your staff do a particularly good job, if I could just have that, in your Clackamas County priorities that we give to that your staff prepare every year and we give to the delegation. There are always statistics and useful information and charts in the back that really explain how many individuals are being served and how many, what the need is and why that federal funding is really important. And that helps your congressional delegation advocate for increased funding or at least holding steady on the funding that is available at the federal level. 2 other issues that are in your priority list. One is I-205 improvement project. The I-205 project was submitted by ODOT for infra funding, which is a category of funding for discretionary grant funding. Unfortunately, it was not successful, and even though the congressional delegation advocated for it, that was disappointing because there needs to be an alternate funding source for that particular project. So we can't say that we were successful with a $100 million discretionary grant. In that case, we were successful in getting the delegation to support the project, but they weren't the decision makers. It was USDOT.
Yeah, why do you think that project was not funded, and were there any Oregon transportation projects funded from that pot of money?
There were no infra projects funded in Oregon, isn't there? Correct. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And why do you think that is? I mean, we have not, Oregon in general has really not received much federal funding back, and 2 senators sit on very influential committees in order to do that.
It's a really good question. And we were quite surprised last week when the mega projects were announced, and we were pretty confident that there was going to be a project funded in Coos Bay. Not that we advocate for that project, but just since Congressman DeFazio is now out of Congress, we thought that would be kind of his swan song and that the administration would be responsive, and it wasn't. And so it appears to us that it is a high time that Oregon gets its fair share, and it's not at this point yet. That doesn't necessarily mean it won't. It just means that in these first rounds of discretionary grants under the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we haven't been as successful as a state as we'd hoped to be. And none of the funding has come to I-205 or to Abernathy Bridge at this point.
Commissioner Salas.
Yeah, on this topic here, I'm just come from the 12 years of being a commissioner and advocating for and hoping that we could bring something back to Clackamas County, Oregon, whatnot. And I'm looking at what's on the agenda in the packet, and it's pretty thin on transportation, right? I mean, we got we're not asking for much, but it really doesn't amount to very much. Is there any potential with the change in Congress and the 6th District or the 5th District for any assignments? Do we have any inkling of what those assignments will be for the two new Congress folks or 3 new Congress folks?
So they haven't, to my knowledge, unless they've done it while I've been here with you all in the county. They announced chairs yesterday for the different committees on the House side. They had not announced rank and file members. Again, last I looked, I could be slightly out of date by a couple hours, so apologies on that. They hadn't announced membership yet on that. I believe, from what we understand, Congresswoman Chavez DeRemer has been advocating very strong to be on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which would be great. The state of Oregon is losing a member on that committee in Peter DeFazio. It would be great to have her on the committee in order to kind of replace him to advocate on Oregon's behalf on transportation matters. It would be great for Clackamas County to have her on that committee to really focus on Clackamas County's transportation and needs, of which there are many that we work on your behalf. Congresswoman Salinas, I don't believe that's a committee that she's been requesting in order to try and be on. We should learn in the next couple of days exactly where they end up there. I think in terms of advocating on your behalf, I mean, Hal and I have already met with both offices, independently and together. We're excited to have new members representing Clackamas County, new people we can work with, new people we can educate on your kind of unique needs and how they can be helpful. And I think they'll both be great offices to work with. They both have already made some very good staff hires that we're very pleased with. In many cases, people we've known for years, and we're looking forward to working with both those offices.
I think there's a real opportunity, Commissioner Savas, with the fact that 2 new members of Congress from Oregon, both in fairly competitive congressional districts, represent Clackamas County, because the Republican Party will be responsive, I would think, to Congresswoman DeRemer, and I think the Democratic Party is going to be pretty responsive to Salinas and wanting to be as supportive as they can so that they can run on those successes. And that potentially is a real opportunity for Clackamas County, because they represent, different sections of the county, but I think the Democratic and Republican caucuses will try to be as responsive as they can, because they're both such competitive seats. And so I think that's an opportunity for us. In redistricting, Congressman Bentz actually got a very small sliver of Clackamas County on the far eastern side of the county. But from what we can tell, there are no people living in that section of Clackamas County. I think it's just kind of reservation land from the Warm Springs. And so I'm not so sure that he will become a strong advocate. But now, with Blumenauer, Salinas, and Chavez DeRemer, and the 2 senators, we've got a nice team that should be pretty responsive. And hopefully, we'll be able to push forward a more aggressive transportation agenda.
Yeah, if I may, I just want a quick follow-up, and I won't take much time, but my frustration is not directed towards anyone in this room. So, you're all doing great work. I appreciate that. But I have 12 years of frustration with, we're a donor county, it seems. We're a donor county or a donor state or both. I don't know which. But I appreciate having family in Lane County, how successful Congressman DeFazio was in bringing things home. And I think he did really, and also Blumenauer as well has done, brought some congressional money back. And Portland's done very well. We are way behind, and I'm almost livid, frankly, not just about the federal side, but also on the state side, is that we have severe needs, and I feel we're being targeted in the sense that we're being undermined everywhere we go. We were facing a land swap as a result of not being ready, and not being ready is the very infrastructure they deny us, the Sunrise Corridor, for example. So, we can't win. Mm-hmm. We're not poised to win anywhere. So I don't know how we amp it up, but I just want to share my frustration. Again, no one in this room, but we got to do something here. And there's not much in there. I appreciate the locks. I appreciate the progress in the locks. Thank you. That was great work, very hard work. I appreciate that. But the roads, transit, and I don't mean light rail per se, I'm talking about transit in general. We don't get much here in the county, but yet we're being somewhat victimized, tolling on the 205 corridor with not having any alternatives. None. There's no transit. There's no money for transit. There's no real plan for any substantive transit for an alternative. So I can complain all day, but I just want to just air that.
Well, thank you. It is something that we'll be talking with the county staff about priorities that are put forward this year for congressionally directed spending requests. And we were meeting with Commissioner West earlier today, hearing about a project at 65th and Ellingston as a priority in his area that he's so familiar with. And you've just mentioned Sunrise Corridor and yeah, you look at some of the congressionally directed spending that's in the omnibus bill that was just passed. There are a lot of projects on 82nd and 181st and on kind of on the northern side of the region, and they don't come down too far south. So I think there's certainly a conversation that needs to be had.
Yes, Sue.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Savas, if I could just add, one thing I've noticed is because there haven't been a lot of earmarks here for years, there's not a belief they can be delivered. And the fact that we just did, I think is going to open up some thinking, because we have had to really pull the ideas out from across the county, I think because it just hasn't been a reality for a long time. So I'm expecting to see a longer list.
Yeah, well, the chair's comment about the grants, the infra grant, I mean, I understand, you know, the earmarks, congressional directed funding has been off the table for a long time and somewhat coming back. But again, even on the grants, we lose.
And Oregon should have received something. I concur with you.
Well, the good news on that front is that the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is a 5-year bill, and there will be many more rounds of discretionary grant funding. And I think, you know, we can continue to make the case that it is time for Clackamas County and for Oregon to get its share. And so
It's good to know, and we will reiterate
yeah,
our transportation needs.
it isn't as if we've missed the only boat out there. We might have missed the first boat, but there'll be more.
Great.
So, yeah.
Great. Commissioner Schrader is online from her travels. And Tony, would you let her in, please?
Commissioner Schrader?
Yes, I wanted to say hello to our colleagues here from Washington, D.C. I am currently at Airbus in Alabama as a result of being part of NACO's Economic Mobility Leadership Network, which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But I was told this is kind of a critical opportunity to speak. I do concur with what Commissioner Savas has said. But I also concur with the notion that we are positioned, I think now, particularly with Congressman Chavez DeRemer and Congresswoman Salinas, to move forward with some additional funding for transportation. So please, when the time comes, let me know what I need to do to help. I will be at the legislative conference at the National Association of Counties in February, because I chair the CEWD committee, and I don't know if you think it might be worthwhile, and if my colleagues think it might be worthwhile. If I'm there, if you need me to do any Hill visits, I'd be glad to do so to help out. But I'm also hoping some of my other colleagues might join me at the Ledge Conference, so I'm just going to put that out there as well. So.
Well, that's great. Nice to hear from you, Commissioner, and we'll work with Sue and the staff to try to make your trip to in February as useful as possible for the county. And we're happy to staff you on any of the NACO work as well. So just let us know how we can help.
Yeah, NACO has asked to meet with Senator Merkley, so just that I know for sure. But I think we'll have to consult with my colleagues and the staff to see if they want me to, just stick with the NACO piece, or if there's anything additional that I could offer to do, I'd be glad to do so. So, thank you.
Good.
Thank
good.
you, Commissioner Schrader. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Well, I was just, one more point to emphasize was, in your priority list, you were advocating for, the county was supporting legislative efforts to add flexibility on the use of the America Rescue Plan, the ARPA funding. And that language was actually included in the omnibus spending bill that was just passed on the 23rd of December and signed into law right before the end of the year. So you have increased flexibility on any federal funding left that you haven't allocated or spent for ARPA, which I understand is, in the $10 or $12 million range. So that's good news. You may decide to spend it just as you would have, or you may decide that you've got a bigger palette to paint with, and you can look at infrastructure projects as well as any of the human services kinds of projects that originally the funding was intended for.
Yeah, thank you for advocating on that. It's important. And I'm sure this board will have a discussion on what to do with that later. Anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, I think that's it. Happy to answer any other questions.
Yeah.
Commissioners? Commissioner Schull, you're up.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for coming out here. You got a good day. If you would have been here last week, you would have been blown away.
That's what my parents told me, yeah.
Yeah. On the priority regarding forest products, the Secure Rural Schools Act was extended, but the current extension in time will run out. That act, although it's keeping our rural logging communities, their heads above water when it comes to schools and police and fire, it's not enough to lift those communities out of the poverty that they've endured since the Endangered Species Act affected logging in this state. And federal law and regulations are having a negative effect on the economic vitality of this state, because one of our greatest natural resources is timber. And if we are not able to manage it, harvest it, and benefit from it in a wise way, we will never, ever make up for the loss of those jobs with making chips or running shoes. Okay? Let me share with you quickly how this has affected harvest since the 2020 fires. By December 19th, 2021, commercial timber businesses such as Weyerhaeuser had harvested over 90% of the 2020 fire-damaged timber, and they had replanted like 80+% of that. Well, at the same time, on that same day, BLM reported that they had only harvested some 20%. And they claimed that that was because of the extra restrictions on BLM from the Endangered Species Act. So we need you, Congress, to stimulate increased harvest and a more sustainable and a more responsible management of these resources, and Clackamas County needs it very badly. So, again, what happens when the Secure Rural Schools Act runs out and is not extended again? Then what? And without that harvest to stimulate the economy, we are going to be in a big problem. Thank you, gentlemen.
Absolutely, no, I appreciate that, agree completely. It's something, I mean, We've been fortunate because the Oregon delegation, Senator Wyden, for years, Senator Merkley, the rest of the delegation have been very effective at getting it reauthorized, even sometimes when we thought, this is the end, this is now done. They've been able to pull rabbits out of hats and get that reauthorized and actually keep those kind of baseline safety net dollars going to rural communities. But agree completely on the need for more active management on the forests, and it's something we've worked on the county's behalf on, in the past, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so in the future.
I have one more quick question. It has to do with your I-205 priority. I would be interested, maybe not today, but sometime, to learn how many other counties in this nation that have a federal highway going through their county are going to be required to pay for improvements like we're going to be required to pay for I-205. Now, many of us are fighting the notion of tolling because of its very expensive and negative effects on our county. But what's going on in Washington, D.C. to keep and maintain the federal highway system without having to come down to our families and our businesses that use I-205 to pay for its improvement and maintenance?
We will take a look at other counties. Unfortunately, I think because infrastructure costs have gotten so expensive, increasingly local governments are viewed as the source of funding to make up the difference. And you all just don't have the capacity to do that. So there is this misperception or just miscommunication on how we're going to actually fund some of these major projects. And it's about more than just bridges. You hear a lot about bridges. When anyone talks at the federal level, they talk about bridges. And of course, Abernathy Bridge is one of those examples. But I-205, there are probably lots of I-205s out there, and whether or not the local community has the capacity to actually take on the responsibility that typically state DOTs would have taken on is a big question.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, before I entertain any more comments or questions, I want to turn your attention to page 6 of the memo. There is, starting on page 5 actually, priorities table for our federal delegation. And I think we need to talk about that and codify it. Is that what we want going forward? I assume we all have read those. Are we in agreement with that? Is there anything we want to change, remove, or add? We still have, for instance, the I-205 projects, COVID pandemic recovery, Falls Locks, that is ongoing. I suspect more money is going to be needed at the federal level because more repairs are being discovered. I'm sitting on that commission. Wildfire protection, rural schools funding. Other transportation projects include Bull Run Replacement Bridge, Sunrise Gateway Corridor, Mount Hood Recreation, Housing and Human Services. There's a whole list of stuff in this chart. Broadband expansion in Clackamas County, disaster response, pending legislative proposals. What is that, Hal or Mark? Can you talk about that?
So Chair Smith, you're going to be discussing that at your next session in a few minutes here.
Oh, we are?
Yes.
I think that's with Chris and Trent.
This is confusing because we have this document at the 10 a.m. session, and then it comes up at the next session, too.
This is your last year's agenda. This is like the status report, the report card of last year's agenda. And the next session, you're going to be approving this current upcoming year's agenda.
And what time is our next session?
5 minutes ago.
Okay, let's start the next session.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Hal and Mark, and Jake and Michelle for being here very much.
Commissioner Savas, do you have a quick comment?
Well, it's on the topic of what's coming this year, right? And I just want to go back somewhat to my other comments and the concern, is there a different way to play the game? I mentioned being a donor county, possibly a donor state. I'm compelled, frankly, to add up or find out how much gas tax, federal gas tax, we've contributed over all these years and how much we've gotten back, whether it's at the county level or the state level. Whatever we're doing, You know, I don't know if there's a way to ramp it up or a different card to play, but I'm open to ideas. I see what's in this packet here. As far as the approvals, for the federal approvals for the tolling project, which we're heavily impacted by as well as the cities, the economic impacts of that are going to be tremendous, and not in a good way. It's not going to be a positive thing, it's going to be a negative. It seems to me that I'm very concerned that ODOT staff, senior ODOT staff have made or presented themselves or the situation in the sense that it's already a done deal. Like the NEPA, all of that, the EIS, all that, it's a green light, and they're going to go forward. And the recent thing we found out on Friday was $100 million asked to build the toll infrastructure, as though the NEPA process doesn't even exist or it's already been approved. I'm sorry, this is out of step. There seems to be regulations and processes. If it's just a farce, then I don't know. Should we call it out? But at the federal level, it seems to me that if there is truly a function there, and there's truly a public process and a process, environmental process, they ought to be held accountable.
Okay, we're going to move on. I appreciate that, Commissioner Savas. Let's move on to the next session because we do have an 11 o'clock coming up.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. It was great meeting you guys. Thank you.
Likewise.
All right, so your next policy session is approval of 2023 state and federal legislative agendas. Public and Government Affairs is also leading this topic. Sue Hilda, Chris Lyons, Trent Wilson. I recommend you start with the federal agenda, since they just talked about it, please. Go ahead.
What
Okay.
paper do you want me to look at?
The policy session worksheet for 10:30.
All right, got it?
Attached to that are drafts of a state and federal agenda. We're looking forward now to 2023. This is a compilation of months of work with the departments across the county to really get to this list. Once you approve it, then Chris and Trent and Northwest Public Affairs, Phil Donovan and his shop, work with us at the state level and then summit at the federal level to try to achieve these. Chris?
Yes. So I'm going to set the stage first, and then we'll do the federal agenda and then state. So it flows from the previous presentation. So first, key dates and some dynamics to be aware of. At the federal level and the U.S. Congress, session has already begun. And it's been a wild one at that. It started January 3rd, goes till January 3rd of 2025. There is Democrats are in control of the Senate, and the Republicans are now in control of the House. In terms of our own delegation, we still have Senators Wyden and Merkley at the Senate, but we have a number of changes on our House members. We now have Lori DeReamer, Congressman Lori Chavez DeReamer, as well as Congresswoman Andrea Salinas, representing the bulk of the county, along with Congressman Earl Blumenauer, and then Congressman Cliff Benz now has a very small portion of the county in the east. At the state level in the legislature, session begins next Tuesday, January 17th, and they are limited to 160 days, so at most they can go until June 25th because it's a long session. There are Democratic majorities in both the House and Senate, and lots of new faces. I think important to us, the new Senate president is Rob Wagner, who represents a portion of the county, and Speaker Rayfield remains Speaker in the House. The legislature always has about 3,000 bills in a long session, and 1,800 of those came out this week. So we as a county are in the process of reviewing those now. And just so you're aware, if you do make it down to Salem, and we plan to bring you down, the building, Capitol building, is under construction. They are doing seismic retrofitting, so there are a lot of areas you cannot go, and we'll be limited on places we can hang out in the building. I also want to take a brief moment to talk about the Clackamas Caucus. This was a group we established in 2018 for the purpose of bringing our state legislators together, bipartisan, bicameral, to work together on shared priorities. And they have done an amazing job doing that. There have been 16 members part of that, and last year, at the time, Representative Mark Meek and Rick Lewis were the co-chairs of the group, and we understand they are interested in continuing it. So in light of the fact that Clackamas County has so many new legislators, we will need to do a lot of work to bring those folks together and not only become aware of the caucus, but what their role is in that and make sure that they're active participants. And that caucus, what has historically happened is they take up the county's priorities as their own priorities and work on them on behalf of the county and all of our shared residents. So that has worked out extremely well for us. And you will be seeing these legislators. We hope to have our annual legislative breakfast here in a few weeks here at the county. So we will be in touch with you on that one. And lastly, just to orient you on our agendas themselves, and you've seen them already, we have in both the state and federal agendas, the way they are laid out, and this is last year's agenda, there are county initiatives and priorities, and these are issues that are by and large Clackamas specific, and that they are things that we are advocating on as top priorities for us. A good example is funding for the county courthouse. We put together these agendas based on feedback we get from our departments, from each of you, as well as what we understand is happening or will be happening in Congress or the legislature to know where there will be, where the issues will be that we can be part of those efforts. And then on the flip side of both agendas, we have what are called the legislative principles. Think of these as values that the county stands for at a very high level. They are framed around the board's 5 strategic priorities, and they help us be able to have the flexibility to take positions on issues as they come at us that we cannot predict in advance. So that's been in place for now at least a couple years, and it's been extremely helpful for us to be more effective advocating for each of your priorities. So with that, I will turn it over to Trent to walk us through the federal agenda.
Thanks very much, and good morning, Commissioners. Gary, Administrator Schmidt, appreciate the time this morning. Always like the structure that we have here where Summit comes and presents what's happened and gives you all a framework for thinking about how we can look at the next year. And so with your federal agenda today, as Chris pointed out, our initiative, the thing that if not for Clackamas County, what would we be working on, what would be moving forward, remains 205. And the big change here, it was in our objectives. We've added some language about if tolling were to move forward, that it be regional in nature. We don't want to be alone, right, if tolling's going to happen. So that's been sort of a value position of the county in the past. We think it's a successful one and a good structure moving forward, that if it were to happen, we don't want to be alone. We want that regional toll program to happen at the same time as the Clackamas County toll program, if it were to go forward. We know that there's strong feelings about tolling in Clackamas County, especially about 205, but if it were to happen, we wanted to make sure that the region is doing this together, that we're not isolated in that. And for our priorities, you'll see a lot of the same topics. Willamette Falls locks, federal forest management, predictable revenue, wildfire prevention, Mount Hood recreation, so continuing that partnership with Congressman Blumenauer's work for recreation and access on Mount Hood, which includes some of our own transit work up there on the mountain, up to Mount Hood. Housing and human service programs will continue. And then new to your priorities list, and we're recommending this, is encouraging increased food production and production acreage in the county. And that's consistent with the board's goal to improve that food production in Clackamas County. And the reason it's on it this year, we're recommending this for the agenda this year, is because we anticipate Congress to take up the Farm Bill reauthorization that's coming here. So we want to make sure that items that are important to Clackamas County are included in that work. Recall 2 years ago we had the heat dome, and many specialty crops in Clackamas County struggled through that season because we lost a lot of berries at that time. Clackamas County remains a large producer of Christmas trees, which is also a specialty type of crop. And a lot of nurseries as well, which we think is captured in the specialty crop. So having this language in here gives us a little bit of a permission to go and participate in the Farm Bill as it's reconsidered for this next authorization. Those are the priorities and the initiative that we're proposing continue for the federal agenda this year. And we're here for questions on that.
Commissioners, did you take a look at the list? Commissioner Scholl, and then I have a couple of thoughts I want to present.
Yeah, and one last thing, just to make a note of the fact that we will once again be gathering and bringing to you proposed earmarks to pursue for this year as well. We're in the process of gathering those from departments now. We have a little extra time on that based on the
Good.
congressional schedule, but
So we
just so
don't
you're
have to
aware.
make hard decisions today at this moment. It's a process that we'll be going through, I assume, several times on this. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, thank you for the information this morning. Of the federal agenda items that you identified, priorities, do you have visibility on the federal laws and regulations that are enhancing progress on those, and what laws and regulations are detracting from our ability to make progress on those? I ask that because the answers to those questions are what I would like to personally get more involved in talking to our congressmen and senators to the U.S. Congress. Okay? I can't talk to them about what I would like to have them try to change unless I know exactly what I need to tell them specifically. So give that some thought in the next couple weeks.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, gentlemen, you very familiar with what I would raised earlier. You heard what I said earlier. Any innovative thoughts? My frustration, as you know, we're all frustrated by this. My colleagues here at the dais, you just seem to get more bad news every day. So any ideas about how we approach our state and federal, because this is both state and federal, the issues I raised. Any thoughts?
Well, as you were speaking earlier, Commissioner, I thought that it was very insightful, and you asked a very interesting question, which was, how do we do things different? And as you know, the county offers us many opportunities for training, and one of those trainings that we've gone through is the 7 habits of highly successful people. One stands out to me, which is control what you can control. So what is in our wheelhouse? What are we in control of? And that's where we can find success. And so I think we do a lot of good work with DTD, with Summit Strategies, to find like where we are able to find that influence. This is, for I-205, for example, it's a project that's owned and managed by ODOT. So what are we in control of in this process? And it's influencing those regional needs or those community needs that we've been working on so far. And we can explore that further, but it's finding those things, Trent's opinion here, it's finding those things that we're in charge of and strengthening those to make that more known, more robust, and bringing along our congressional delegation to do that. And our state delegation too for those state issues. So that's an idea, but that's what was going through my mind when you shared earlier. What can we do different? And it would be to find out what are we in control of.
And we'll be defining those things too, Commissioner Savas, and you're right. Any further comments?
Yeah, well, I understand that, but I guess I was being more specific as to whether it's data or messaging inequities, so forth, highlighting those, more specifics as opposed to approaches. But that
Okay.
being said,
Well, let's discuss it more later. Okay? Commissioner West?
Thank you. Hi there. We just met earlier this morning, and I want to just clarify just something. Right now, ODOT can just, they're doing it. Here comes the tolls on 205, right? Like, we mentioned that. And then it's kind of like you're kind of, there's no real good option here for Clackamas County, because if the regional tolling doesn't happen, then it's just a Clackamas County solely, and then so it's like either way, it's just a bitter, horrible pill for Clackamas County to swallow. Can you explain on that just a little bit so people understand that it's a little more nuanced than just 205?
You're on the right path, Commissioner. Yes, currently ODOT has the authority to toll the I-205 project. It's called Section 129 tolling. If they're building a new bridge, if they're building a new capacity, they have the ability to go and do that toll. That's true. But what the other toll program is that's being discussed in the region is the Regional Mobility Pricing Project. That's regional tolling, and they do not yet have federal authorization to pursue that yet. And so if they don't receive that federal authorization, it is true, to your point, that it could just be I-205 out there. And that's something that, you as a board need to talk about and balance. And working with DTD, we can bring back further conversation there. On the topic of the federal agenda, working with our delegation to understand, what we need in Clackamas County to be successful, aligning the timing of those projects. If they're going to happen anyway, can they be aligned? That's a route that you could go as a board. For example, you could take other routes too. So I just want to put that on the table that our delegation is ready to listen to the community needs and help where they can. At the federal level, it's really hard. And so one of our federal efforts have been to try and diversify the funding bucket for 205. That's why the infra project was so important last year. That's why we supported it, for ODOT to go and try to get $125 million for phase 2 of the I-205 project to diversify that funding. Because if they could get $125 million, that's $125 million that's not told later, right? So that's a way to think about where those federal funding opportunities are. And we're going to keep looking under every rock, state and federal, I think, to try to figure out ways to diversify that funding, maybe to the point where hopefully they don't need tolling at all. But as you said, Commissioner, it's going in that direction. Where can we help? How can we influence that?
I would totally I'm going to just throw it out there since we're just talking. The voters in Clackamas County turned down funding to help kids that were in trauma situations. And I understand why voters in Clackamas County are just tired of being nickeled and dimed and feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick. But Health and Human Services with kids in foster care, kids that endure trauma, really vulnerable populations along those lines, is there any advocacy maybe to find additional support for that population, maybe even specifically kids in foster care through Health and Human Services through the federal level? Are there any opportunities to backfill what we weren't able to get? It was, there was a lot of good things. We just maybe couldn't afford it locally. There's a lot of things we just can't afford that we like. Is there opportunities federally for some of those health and service for that population specifically, those kids?
So kind of a complex answer. I think the answer is yes. Over 90% of H3S's budget comes from state and federal resources. So here in your agenda, you're giving us license to go and pursue and work with H3S and Summit Strategies to go and pursue funding and support for housing and human service programs. And Trent would say that that's captured here in this principle for us to go and fight for what you're asking for.
And Chair, before I was elected, we had a long conversation about that, and you cared very much about this population. I remember we were on the phone. We lamented about wanting to make sure this population was cared for. So I didn't want to forget about that. Now that I sit on this dais and we're talking about priorities that we go after, I really want to make sure we remember those kids.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you. I also have two priorities that I'd like the board to look at. It has to do with economic readiness and homelessness. Senate Bill 683, of which I just passed out a copy, is a pre-session filing. And the opening statement authorizes counties to identify lands that must be made available for industrial use. Very broad, but the bill is very specific. I would like to see us support that and other bills like that. It goes to the situation where we're confined within the urban growth boundary. I think that is very important. This is a pre-session filing. I have some copies for you gentlemen if you would like, but that needs to be also one of the issues we're looking at. Secondly, it came to my attention from an email from a constituent on October 6, 2022, and her name is listed in this email. I'll be happy to share it. She lives out of Sandy, about 10 miles, and she has a home on 2 acres. It is a sited home, which is very legal. She invited her sister and her 2 children to park an RV on that home because the husband had died and they were no longer to stay in their home. A neighbor called up and complained because it was an illegal use. And we tried at the county to find out if that was a legal pathway. No, it's a state law. I would like to change the state law to allow in unincorporated rural areas of the county and any county that it is a permitted use to be able to offer shelter in an RV on your home, because this is a state policy that adds to homelessness. And our staff went back and forth with them, and we still do not have a resolution on this. But on my farm of 50 acres, if I have a relative who is going to be evicted, and you never know at what point in this horrid economy, and that's why our homeless situation has ballooned to where it was, and where it is and what the future will be. We have policies like this on the books that add to the homelessness. I would invite all of my relatives to park their RVs on my farm. I will hook them up to my septic tank and my water supply, because that's what compassionate, caring people do. This law is not compassionate, it is not caring, and it adds to the homeless situation. And I want that to be a priority of this board and you gentlemen going forward.
Great.
Madam Chair, I think you're now focused on the state agenda, and I
I am
recommend
focused on
we
the state
move
agenda,
there.
but I'm looking at the clock.
Yes.
We have 3 minutes left.
Yeah,
So I think we're going to have to come back, maybe at another time. We can just rubber stamp today.
Okay.
But what do you want us to do?
We need you to pass this today or give us alternative feedback, because the legislature's starting next week, and we
I
need to have
suggest
a
we go
framework.
ahead and do we need a motion?
Can I make a?
Just a moment. Do we need a motion?
So yes, a motion on your federal agenda and your state agenda. You take the time you need. We can start the next session a little bit later.
Okay.
Finish this.
How do you want to handle that, Gary?
So I'd recommend, let's finish the federal agenda first. So if you have any other feedback to the proposal, let's add it, and then we'll ask for a motion to accept or to add for the
I
federal
will
agenda.
accept a motion to accept the federal agenda as presented, knowing that is fluid and could change.
Your Honor, I moved.
It's- Go ahead, Commissioner.
Oh, wait, do I
Go
need?
ahead, Commissioner West.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, I move to approve the federal agenda as read and discussed, knowing that it is fluid.
Do I hear a second?
Oh, Martha, it's Martha.
Commissioner Schrader, did you second that?
Yes, I did.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Commissioner Savas, you have a comment.
Yeah, I'm not going to be disrespectful, but I'm just going to make a point. I'm not going to support this vote because I really think we need to do something different, something significant. I do understand it's fluid, but I think on our opportunity to make some change amongst all the things we're fighting, frankly, at a crisis level that we're fighting today, we need to be, I think, either unique or more aggressive, and I think this is the opportunity to do such. So to me, we're basically, I don't see much anything different than the last agenda or the agenda before that or the agenda before that.
Well, I think we can revisit this, Commissioner Savas, but we do need to move ahead on something. To not take a vote today, to not codify what has been presented to us is indeed doing nothing. And we have to do something. It's not perfect. I don't want perfection to be the enemy of progress here. So I think we can come back on the federal agenda, especially as things arise, and look at tackling these problems from a different point of view. We're not going to accomplish it in a half hour today or the previous half hour. Commissioner West.
I totally agree with Commissioner Savas. I think the level of urgency I've been living at, just hitting the ground here, is because there's crisis, and we have to approach it in such a way and be that urgent. As the maker of the motion, and maybe we will revisit this, but Commissioner Savas, do you want to amend the motion in any capacity? Do you have any ideas also, or do you have any ways that we can make the motion better, that we could all be on the same board? And if not, that's okay too, we're all where we're at. I'm just asking.
Sure. Chair, if I may?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I was going to say prior to your speaking, Commissioner, I was just thinking, if not now, then when?
Yeah.
And so if the when is identified here today, we can come back and actually spend some serious time, 30 minutes or 2 30-minute sessions. I don't think is really going to, at the magnitude in the situation we're in, I think it deserves more time.
So I'm not opposed to doing that. However, we're not going to walk into a next meeting cold. I want a list from every commissioner written down so everybody understands where we're at. To sit here and just say something off the fly verbally or our next session isn't going to cut it. We need to codify it. We need to have some facts, and we need to have specific asks when we come back, because I think that's a good way to do business. I am not in disagreement with Commissioner Savas at all on this, but we need to be specific. We've known, commissioners, this meeting was coming for many weeks now, and we could have added to it. I have brought 2 specific proposals for the state agenda. I would expect any commissioner can do that going forward. But Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Savas's concerns. I agree we need to put pressure on some points that are hurting us in this county. But my concern is if we don't pass this motion today, how long will it take for us to get back here so that you can have your marching orders to get going? And so that's my concern. If we pass a motion today, you can take action, right?
Right.
And we can come back and modify that in time. But know that that's probably going to happen, okay?
I think that the major priority buckets are here. You're asking about strategy. And strategy is a conversation we're constantly in, looking for opportunity. And so I think if you bless this, it gives us the leeway to look for those strategies in these areas.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner West, please be brief.
I will be, I know, I got to be told that. We all have our weaknesses. Is it my understanding that, am I correct in understanding that this is broad buckets? Because when I first went through this, it was like, well, why don't we, because I think the 7th is this Friday or tomorrow, this week is the end of like on the state level, right, where they can't put any more bills forward, and then we see them all on the 17th, and I'm just like looking at like, well, what bills are we going to specifically get behind? That's in when I'm understanding, that's the next step in this process, right? So I'm going to support moving forward, but I also totally agree with Commissioner Savas and Steinway. That's a no, but I think both things can be true at the same time on like where our shared angst is. Yeah, that's what I feel about it.
Thank you very much for your comments. Having served in the legislature and serving in the longest session on record and the most special sessions, I can tell you it's a moving ball. We will always have an opportunity, probably on a weekly basis, to say yea or nay and add amendments to these bills. That is how legislation is done. This is not a done deal. Commissioners, we need to support this and move forward. Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Scholl.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Nay.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much. Now I will consider a motion to pass the, Chris, you want to say something?
I'm happy to run through it very quickly. State agenda proposal. Clackamas County Courthouse, #1 priority, seeking $61 million to finalize the state's 50% share of funding this project. Second, I-205 improvements project. We've discussed this, but one thing to add is that your concerns about tolling, you're not alone. The region completely has similar concerns, and so we are in the process of pursuing a bill on this jointly with our partners, and we can bring more details back to you soon on that. Under the county priorities, the #1 priority listed here is rebuilding the critical partnership between the state and counties. We are feeling this issue every day. Examples being these unfunded mandates we keep experiencing from the state, the lack of collaboration and coordination that the state is doing with us. It feels more like them doing it to us. And those are all symptoms of this bigger issue, which is they don't view us as true partners. And so this is something we're working very closely on with AOC, because this is a county-wide, statewide county issue that affects so many areas that we work in. Second issue here is land availability and readiness. This stems from the semiconductor work currently underway in the state. So to your point, Chair, I think your issue, actually potentially both of the issues you cited can either fit into this bucket or the next one, which is addressing the housing crisis, which, as we heard yesterday, the governor did 3 executive orders on homelessness and housing. And so we can, I think, address both of your concerns through all of the action that's going to take place on those 2 buckets during session. The fourth item, sufficient and predictable revenue and state indemnification of local governments in cases where we are carrying out the services on behalf of the state. This has been an issue for a number of years, and it still needs to be addressed. And then finally, funding for local public safety diversion programs tied to addictions. We know that behavioral health and addictions are going to be a priority of the legislature. We have our own needs that we might be able to get some funding for example, a stabilization center, juvenile prevention programs, things that would help address those issues for people experiencing addictions. And that is it. And then the
Comments?
backside is the principles.
Yep, thank you very much, Chris. Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner West.
Yeah, well, I know my comments and my assignment is primarily transportation, but I won't repeat anything about my transportation concerns, but I do want to mention that I've been looking forward to this opportunity to have a great discussion, a deep discussion, especially when it comes to mental health facilities, detox centers, Measure 110, a number of things related to housing. What I was I won't say disappointed, but maybe so. Maybe that's the right word. Yesterday, when the governor signed those 3 bills, and that is no real serious mention of any facilities, qualifications for mental health people to enter, to qualify for certification. There's barriers for the ability to say this person should receive mental health treatment or should be. I forgot the terminology, but there's a number of things I think that we really, and I appreciate Commissioner West's experience with this as well and his passion for this as well, but now's the time again, but not enough time today.
Commissioner West and then Commissioner Scholl.
Commissioner Savas, is exactly what I want to talk about. Maybe in our priorities, something broadly around like more recovery-based focused interventions. Not so, we're real quick with housing. We love to talk about housing, but we're not honest about making sure that we are getting every single resource available to treat mental illness. We are 50th in the nation. We talk about it all the time, and it's still the reality. And we also don't talk about the issues of addiction. We need a number of detox centers. They're not easy to do. They're not cheap, but we got to have them. We also need, this is more specific, but maybe a broader priority around this. We need to welcome Universal Health Systems to come put $50 million in Wilsonville to build a mental health facility with emergency room beds that takes TRICARE. Very few facilities take TRICARE for our veterans. And we need that ground should have been broke. That hospital should be being built right now. And if listening to the urgency from the new governor, Kotek, I hope that she would see the value in addressing core critical issues that are the real cause of homelessness, that cause people to lose their stability, and it's often these illnesses. And I hope that we can have some urgency in our priorities and be creative about getting those things moved forward on a state level.
I appreciate your comments. Commissioner West, not everything can be an urgency all at once. I'm going to caution that it's a methodical process at the legislature. And as bills come up in certain committees, we all will have an opportunity to address each and every situation. And I suggest we methodically go through this process in the next 6 months. Now, legislation is a process, and some find it very frustrating. But that's how we do it. It's how the United States Congress does it. It's how all legislatures across America does it. And so we all will have our opportunities to address exactly what you want and what you want. And I suggest we divvy up those assignments according to our desires. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Mm-hmm. I see this Senate Bill 683, which is very encouraging. If passed, would give the counties the opportunity to identify industrial lands. Okay, it looks like this would repeal some 6 ORSs that look to me like they go back to 1970s. LCDC, Thousand Friends of Oregon, their effort to keep our state from looking like Orange County. I understand that, but this is good. Is there a similar bill out of those 1,800 bills you mentioned that would, if passed, give this county the ability to open residential lands outside of the urban growth boundary? Don't need an answer today, but I sure would like to get one. Thank you.
Yeah, you can watch that for us. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of land use stuff. So, commissioners, any other thoughts before we take a motion to approve the state agenda moving forward?
I got to ask this question. Gentlemen, do you believe that this slate for this state, if we make progress on it, will have the greatest effect in improving the lives of the people in Clackamas County? Or is there something else we need to add?
I would say this covers, this touches on most, if not all, of the board's priorities, and it is also very current in terms of the legislature's priorities. So I think it's
Okay,
striking
good.
the right tone.
Okay, good, thank you.
Commissioner Schrader, is your hand up?
No, it is not, Chair. I am waiting for the vote as I am ready to go to another meeting after this is,
Why
after we
don't-
finish.
Why don't you move to approve the state legislative agenda?
I move to approve the state legislative agenda.
Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Comments, Commissioner West, please be brief.
I might offer an amendment, just within this, I don't see a robust enough priority around mental health services and drug addiction treatment priorities. I cannot vote for this priority list with that being, in here. If we can, can I amend it to maybe say, hey, can we add this in here? without-
Add what? What specifically do you want to add?
I want to add in that we make mental health services and drug addiction treatment for recovery a priority in our legislative, as we pursue legislation.
To say, that's fine, the emotion is fine, but because it's not there, doesn't mean it won't happen. So,
Go ahead.
yeah, so we need to support this and move forward.
So it's on your principles list. Is that okay, Commissioner West, or would you like it on the priorities list? There's like 3 sections here, right? Initiatives, priorities, principles. It's already on the principles under ensure safe, healthy, and secure
I would
communities.
like some priority, it's different than a principle, I'd like some priority on this. And I'm happy to vote for this, I just want to make sure that I voice that out there and make that
Trent?
Maybe Trenton one, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add what Gary shared. Thank you for that. And then also, with the public safety implementation team, we've been working with the behavioral health office on what they have capacity for moving forward with at this time, which I think is really important. And that's where that last bullet point in the priorities is coming from, funding to support a local public safety diversion program. That's for those folks who are getting picked up because they're getting a call out in the public. Rather than sending them to jail, they're going to be able to go to this other behavioral health resource, give them a 23-hour sort of turnaround time so that they're not going into jail. That's actually a dynamic goal for Clackamas County because, as you know, part of your goal is to find a way to get to a new jail at some point. And this program would help you understand what your needs are if you can create a dynamic diversion program that supports that sort of offer. So my recommendation, if you're okay with it, is that this, at least right now, provides what we've worked with behavioral health. The principles, as Gary mentioned, allow us broader flexibility on whatever the legislature throws at us. And then if you'd like to have more, can we please have time to work with the Behavioral Health Office and you to create something that we bring back to you in the future that's a little bit more specific if this isn't working?
Yes, I recommend that. Gary, you have a comment? and
Actually, I'd
then
like to
Commissioner
add, I want to add to what Trent just said. Under priorities, the last bullet, public safety diversion programs, add mental health to that sentence. Would that accomplish what you're trying to do?
And drug treatment services.
That's all part of that line. Can we just add those words?
That's good.
I think
Do
that
I need to
covers
make a
it.
formal amendment to that?
Just
or
a
are we-
moment,
Okay.
please. Commissioner Savas.
I think it's really important, after talking to, not everyone, but a lot of folks about this, that we add the word facilities and services.
Yeah.
I mean, the word, because the issue is taking people to a place, it's not taking people or being treated on site. That's the answer for all. Jail is not the place to treat people, nor is the street.
That's fine.
Yeah.
How is the motion, Gary?
Motion to approve with the added language we just added under.
Yeah, Commissioner Schrader?
I will so move that
Okay.
we move forward with the, like,
Commissioner Schrader has amended the motion to move forward with the state agenda with the additional language regarding mental health and treatment facilities, correct? And who seconded that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, Commissioner Schull has seconded that motion. I'm in total agreement with that. Don't know, it's really not necessary. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's not necessary for what's coming down the pike, but that's okay. It is a priority, I think, for us. We have been talking about this a lot, and every meeting that I have been in on Project Turnkey, when I'm out into the public, I talk about causation and I talk about accountability. The causation is, how did they get homeless? We address that first. I have talked about it until I'm blue in the face, and this is very much in alignment with that. It is being heard out there far and wide, and thank you. Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner West.
Aye.
Commissioner Schull.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. I'm sure we're going to be revisiting many of these issues. Commissioner Schrader.
Yes, Chair Smith, I do need to return to my next meeting. I will let you know that a lot of what we talked about today, I will be bringing information back to the county, particularly when it comes to moving people out of poverty. And I appreciate you allowing me to attend the meeting this morning. So I will be signing off now, and I will see you shortly when I get back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Schrader. Gary, what's up next?
All right, your final session today is county governance training offered by County Counsel Stephen Madcore. He can do this in 40 minutes or less, so we're on schedule.
And if we need to go a little bit past 12 o'clock, Stephen, feel free to do so. I don't want you to miss points.
I know you've had a long morning already, but good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for your time. This is a refresher of sorts that we typically do when we have a new elected in office. This year will be Commissioner West. We also invited the clerk and the treasurer. They could be watching remotely. It is a refresher on county governance. Basically, how does the county function? How does it move forward? Where is its source of authority from? And what are your roles and responsibilities as elected officials in moving that policy agenda? Tony, are we going to have a screen or not? So there's a PowerPoint, and I apologize for I know the chair doesn't like the big screen, but we do have some slides that could be helpful to you. And so basically, what is the function of county government, legal authority and hierarchy, the governance, and things along those lines. You are the policy-setting body for the county. You're the governing body, but you set policy. You don't do necessarily the day-to-day. That rests on your staff, primarily the county administrator and his direct reports and other folks along those lines. You do establish departments, so you can say, we want a juvenile department, we have a sustainability department, we want to expand into housing authority and things along those lines. So you do have that authority as well, but you sit in addition to your legislative function, which is setting policy, you also sit in a quasi-judicial function on occasion when you do your land use hearings on Wednesday, and a lot of your quasi-judicial functions have been delegated to hearings officers and others. Regularly, you would be hearing a lot of land use stuff, planning determinations, planning director interpretations. They would come to you. It goes to a hearings officer. Appeals on dog licenses go to hearings officers instead of coming to the board. Typically, though, the board would sit in that capacity and make those decisions. You also sit as the governing body of your various service districts, which is WES, which is the OSU 4-H, which is North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District, which is the Housing Authority, which is the Development Agency, the Enhanced Law Enforcement District as well. You'll get a better taste of that when you have your budget session coming up, because you will be sitting in the governing capacity of all of those special districts as well. So you are the governing body of those districts also. And where is your source of authority? Where does the county get its authority? Where does it get its clout, its ability to legislate and dictate? It is from the Oregon Constitution. That's where it first happens. It is Article 6, and that is where it says, for example, that the sheriff and the clerk and the treasurer are constitutional positions. We have come across that conversation recently. Which one are constitutional positions? They're in the Constitution. They have to be elected by the people. Unless, of course, you were to be a charter county. That is what Multnomah County is. That's what Washington County is, Clatsop, and others. We are a general law or statutory county. We are not a charter county. Clackamas went for a charter vote in 1996. It failed by 1,540 votes. That had a proposed charter that would reform county governance to a certain extent. Multnomah, for example, has no elected clerk. They have districts. They have they don't have a treasurer up there. They don't have a surveyor. They have them, but they're not elected. They have a CEO, which would be their chair, so their form of government is different in Multnomah County, for example. If you were to be a charter county, you'd have to go out for a charter review committee, and they would come up with proposed charter. It would go out to the public for a vote, and you would be, at that particular time, a charter county. But we are not. Again, we're general law, and our authority is derived by the Constitution, derived by ORS Chapter 204 up to 211, and also by other components of state law as well. So again, when people say charter county, that is not us. We are a general law or statutory county. Does that mean that we're less authorized to do things? The answer is, my estimation, no. You still can legislate in matters of county concern to the extent it is not preempted by state law and to the extent it is compliant, of course, with the Oregon and federal Constitution. So you can regulate in matters of county concern, which is, you know, it can be roads, it can be land use, it can be trees, it can be dogs, it can be things along those lines. Areas that really can't be: guns, booze, areas like that. That's preempted by state law. Also, there's a long arm of state law on landlord-tenant relationships as well. That's an area that's kind of what we call preempted, where a higher authority, a supreme authority, in this case either the state or federal government, has legislated in such a way that local municipalities can't legislate in those particular areas. But the courts have interpreted the difference between a charter county and a general law county as being relatively equal in terms of the scope of their authority. Can you impose taxes? Not single-handedly. In a general law county, you have to send it out to the voters to have a tax increase. Charter county, you can impose taxes without a vote of the people. So there are differences like that. That would be in the charter itself. So that's, again, one of the other differences. But if this board wanted to necessarily legislate in areas, it certainly could do so. The absence of a charter is not going to preclude you from doing so. So the difference between, let's say, Multnomah and Clackamas is you're not districts. You're not partisan. You have no term limits here. Again, charter provisions in there. Your authority is dictated by Chapter 211 in the county code. It basically says you're nonpartisan. It says that the chair presides over the meetings and calls for the agenda. 2 commissioners can have an item on the agenda if you agree to it. That's essentially all it says. You have to be residents and electors of Clackamas County, but that really is about all of the eligibility requirements, and the authority of the chair is he or she presides and he or she sets the agenda. Those are the qualifications. Your other electeds in Clackamas are your sheriff, your assessor, your clerk, your treasurer, your DA, and your justice of the peace. And so, how do you move your agenda forward? You do it by policy setting. You do it by ordinances. An ordinance is going to be a county law. It is the county code. It is applicable countywide, not beyond the county, but only within the county. It is not applicable within cities. County ordinance does not apply to Oregon City, to Wilsonville, to Molalla, to West Lynn, unless the city adopts it. So the city could say, we want the county's animal control provisions to apply here. City council would have to adopt it. Absent that, it is not enforced within a city absent the city's consent. To do an ordinance, it is a law that's written through our office, typically with the help of staff. We present it to the board in a public hearing. Questions are taken. We have a reading of it. It's read by title only. This is all laid out in state law. It's consistent with that. Second reading, 13 days apart. You have, again, public hearing, 13 days apart. There are exceptions to that in the event of an emergency or if the board agrees to it. If it's unanimous and you are provided with all the material beforehand, it could be done in one reading. We typically don't do that because it's a very strict statutory requirement. Second reading, it's effective immediately. The law would be, if an emergency is declared, as soon as the chair signs it, effective immediately. Otherwise, it's effective 90 days afterwards. And we do these regularly. We don't have anything necessarily scheduled shortly. We recently did emergency regulations. We recently did short-term rentals. We'll do code amendments on the regular. So that is one function that the board does, is adopting ordinances. The board also acts by approving orders. You approve orders on the regular. Your consent agenda will have orders in there, and an order is for when Ken Martin comes before you for a boundary change. It will be an order, and it will be the recitals, whereas A, B, and C, it's signed by the board, recorded by the recording secretary, recorded over at the clerk's office, where it will rest in perpetuity. It will be there. Those are the county archives. If somebody wants to look up and see a board order from 20 years ago, that's where they would go find it. You do board orders for transferring jurisdiction, for bond sales, for things along those lines. Certain land use decisions are done by a board order. The board can also act by doing proclamations. You'll do a proclamation, Law Enforcement Recognition Month, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, proclamations such as equity, diversity, and inclusion. We did a proclamation on that, or maybe that was a resolution, I'm not sure. A proclamation, it basically says the board is issuing a statement. It doesn't necessarily have the force and effect of law. It's not an ordinance. It's not an order. It basically is saying this is a position by the board as expressed that it wants to have broadcasted. And a proclamation can be a variety of those particular things, veterans recognition, things along those lines. You also have resolutions. When you do budget referrals, that's by resolution. Declaration of emergency, of which you're all familiar with, that's done by resolution as well. Condemnation actions, when you initiate a condemnation, you have a resolution of public necessity. That starts the resolution in the condemnation process. A resolution is read in its entirety typically, and it's signed, and it's effective immediately, and it's adopted in a single meeting. It doesn't require 2 readings, and it doesn't have a lot of public input in it as well. It's certainly open for commentary if the board wants to make it so, but again, it is a board function and a board act. You also have delegated to the county administrator by way of county code the ability to implement operational and administrative policies. So that is something that's usually vested with the board, but for efficiency, for convenience, you've delegated that to the county administrator by way of county code, saying, county administrator, you can implement policies on when the office is open, inclement weather policies, flag flying policies, things along those lines. And it is all vested with the county administrator. He or she runs it by the board, but you have delegated that authority for operational and administrative functions to the county administrator, and that is part of his responsibility. Again, the board establishes policy, and you do it by way of a quorum. 3 of you is a quorum. It takes 3 to get, excuse me, to get anything done in Clackamas County. You need 3 yeses. And a quorum is, if there's 3 of you here, you can have your public meeting, but if you make to do any decision, it requires all 3 of you. It's not going to be a quorum of the quorum, it is a quorum of the 5. That also is set forth in the county code. So that's called like a fixed quorum. Some boards have what's called a sliding quorum. If you have a quorum of 3, 2 might be able to get business done, but our code says 3 are required to get that business done. So, real quick for the county administrator, his or her duties are set forth under 209. He or she is the district administrator for all your districts, WES, NCPRD, he or she's responsible for that. He's also the budget officer for the county as well. Serves as the supervisor of all the direct reports. So all of the non-elected department directors report to the county administrator and serve at his or her pleasure. He directs the daily use, maintenance of county and district property and assets. And he also has general responsibilities to the board. The board has 2 employees, the county administrator and the county council. Your code also sets forth a provision, and I will read it. And this is something that has, and this is 2.09090. In the exercise of their authority as members of the governing body, board members may individually or as a group discuss fully and freely with the county administrator any matter pertaining to county affairs or the interest of the county, but board members may not direct any county employees other than the county administrator or the county council in the performance of their duties. This section shall not be construed to prohibit a board member from pursuing their role as an ombudsman in making inquiries of county employees concerning the day-to-day conduct of county affairs. You might get a call from a constituent saying, my neighbor has an RV parked on their property. Can they leave it there in perpetuity, or can they leave it there for a long time? And any single one of you could call up Dan Johnson or me or Gary and say, hey, I got a call on this. Is this okay? That's the ombudsman function. You can do inquiries like that. It's not meant to discourage you from doing that. You certainly can. There is certainly a protocol on doing that. What it says, though, is that you can't say to Dan or anybody other than me and Gary, hey, do this or do that. Those are functions that are vested in the county administrator itself. So as an elected, you have certain laws that are applicable to you: public meeting law, public records law, political campaigning by county employees or public employees. You have Oregon ethics law. That's applicable to you as well. And the interesting thing about all of those legal impositions is that it's not against the county, it's against you as elected officials individually. So a deviation from any single one of those, it's not, oh, Clackamas County, it would be commissioner, it would be clerk, it would be sheriff, treasurer, somebody along those lines. A violation of Oregon ethics law is personal to the individual. It could be a county employee, it could also be an elected official, but it's not to Clackamas County. The same applies to a violation of public records law, is personal to the individual. It could be me, it could be you. It's not the county again. So for public meetings law, we're very careful in complying with public meetings law, public records law. I will oftentimes intervene on certain things and say, looks like a quorum, or looks like we're talking county business, or not necessarily appropriate for executive session. And that is for your protection, not mine, yours. So that is to make sure that we don't deviate from the legal requirements imposed upon us, and to make sure that we don't read about any of your names on the Oregon Ethics website or things along those lines. So as coming in from the private sector and becoming an elected official, there are things that folks don't necessarily realize. But with the public meeting, you want to assume that why can't I chat with my colleagues at lunch about A, B, and C, about Gary, about MadCorp, about tolling, about whatever, because it's not done in a public setting. And as elected officials, the law imposes upon you, if you're going to be talking government business, you do it in such a manner that the public can observe and witness and hear. It's not that the public has a right to be heard, because the public meetings law does not say you have to hear from the public. There's no the citizen commentary period that this board has for 3 minutes on a regular basis, that is not a requirement. That is a courtesy that you provide to members of the public. So the public meetings law does not require that members of the public be heard. It requires that you do your business openly, transparently, in a manner that the public can observe and be informed about.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, sir.
How do you incorporate Goal 1 into that?
Goal 1?
Yeah, Goal 1.
Land use Goal 1?
Yeah.
That is, Land Use Goal 1 requires citizen participation, and we incorporate it by way of having our CPOs act in that capacity. So CPOs are our compliance with community planning organizations, of which we have, how many, Gary?
25, I think.
We have a number of them, quite robust, quite active. They fulfill our Goal 1 requirements of having citizen participation in land use matters. And as you know about CPOs, sometimes their interests kind of spread beyond just land use, right? Into other matters. But that's how I would say we comply with Goal 1 is our functions with CPOs.
Yeah, when we say you're not required to hear, hearing can be done verbally, it can be done in writing, and meaningful public involvement required by Goal 1, it seems that is hearing literally hearing, or is it also in written form?
The public meetings law does not require the citizen component. If you have a public hearing, that does require.
Yeah, that's the exception. I'm
Yeah.
not talking about a public hearing.
Yep. So when we have a public hearing, and it's listed on your board agenda, you'll have a public hearing on ordinances. You'll have a public hearing on land use matters. You'll have a public hearing often on things, and that does, boundary changes have a public hearing component. The chair will gavel in, now it's time for open up the public hearing. Any members of the public want to speak, that's where they do get an opportunity to speak, and that isn't even limited to the 3 minutes. They could opine on a variety of things. So does that answer your question, Commissioner Savas, on that?
Well, yeah, well, just the way it was couched, Council MadCorp, it was just couched in a way that we aren't required to hear from the public. It just seems like a strong statement.
I'm just saying the law doesn't require it. You guys are very, very generous with your hearing from the public. It happens, like I said, on the regular. You do it remotely. Tony does it remotely, and you also do it in person. So you have that on a weekly basis. Members of the public can come and speak to the board on any item for the most part, and they have up to 3 minutes to do it. Yeah, I'm just saying the law doesn't require it. It's more of an observation. What the law does require, though, you have to have minutes. You have to have an agenda. It's got to be noticed. Tony takes care of all that. It's posted on our website. It's posted outside. If people want to know what the board's doing, all they have to do is look online, and they have all your agenda items laid out. You have notice requirements. You have it open and receptive area, so members of the public can come here and they can observe. The only exception to that is the executive session. We talked about that this morning during our EMT, and that allows for the board to meet in private without members of the public. Curiously, though, there's members of the media can attend. They just cannot report on it. But that allows the board to have candid conversations about labor negotiations, about real property negotiations, about litigation, threatened or actual, and about a few other items. You can be disciplined, there could be appointment of other people, but those are the general ones that we typically have, or to talk candidly with your lawyers as well. So that's the executive session, and those are matters that are kept confidential and private. And again, the overarching purpose of the public meeting law is to allow for the public to see their government in action. You also have, you've made it applicable as well, the public meetings law, to your hamlets, to your villages, and to all of your ABCs, advisory boards and committees. So all of those sub-entities that advise the board, they too are subject to the public meetings law, same requirements, minutes, agenda, notices, things along those lines. So they're all subject to the same type of thing. We also have the public records law, which serial deliberations. I know that Commissioner West had a question upon that, as did Commissioner Savis in the past. That is where Commissioner A talks to Commissioner B saying, I'm going to vote no on that budget modification. And then Commissioner B says, yeah, me too. And then Commissioner A goes to Commissioner C and says, A and B are going to vote no. How about you? That's all behind the scenes. That's a serial deliberation. Daisy chaining, they call it, things like that. That's when you're deliberating and you're making decisions outside of the public's view and public's observation. So that is deemed prohibited by Oregon Public Records Law, and cases that have interpreted it came out of Lane County. They got 2 cases down there where that scenario happened. It was serial deliberations done behind closed doors. They came out, they voted no on a particular budget item, or maybe they voted yes on it, and the public was like, how did that just happen? There was no conversation about it, whatever. How did we get 5 people just to vote on that? And so they resulted in lawsuits and emails being disclosed and a very hefty attorney fee bill against a couple of the commissioners, and that was personal against them as well. So it can get personal, and it can get expensive. Again, not going to happen at Clackamas because we do it, we're very compliant, and we have some good gatekeepers when it comes to that. So again, violations of public meeting law, it can result in complaints to the Oregon Ethics Commission. It can result in lawsuits as well. Yes, sir.
Yeah. One other one, daisy chaining, which is somewhat similar. So my understanding, maybe you can give us an update. I've been watching Dumdy Handy since 2010, after I got elected, but before I was sworn in. So, for example, if the county council or the county administrator comes up to myself and says, "Oh, Commissioner X, and X are going to vote for this," and by the way, whether they're being solicited for their vote prior to a vote happening, or just sharing the fact that maybe a commissioner might vote this way or a commissioner might vote that way. That's really daisy chaining, is it not?
The court in the case said to find the bright line in those types of situations is a fool's errand, because it is a very nebulous gray area. If you're going to, Commissioner A says, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with this issue that's coming up, to Commissioner B, and shares that same discomfort with Commissioner C, you're sharing your opinion and observation. You're not counting votes. You're not garnering support. You're not killing or approving a project behind closed doors. You're sharing a personal opinion on something. So I think that's probably safe doing that. But if you're out there, again, counting votes and gathering support in the absence of a public session, and you touch on 3 people, that could be problematic.
Yeah, well, I was trying to make a distinction between serial deliberations and daisy chaining, and daisy chaining being someone other than the board. So again, my example of being, if the county council, for example, as an example, or the county administrator as an example, is part of that daisy chain, are they as well subject to that violation?
They're potentially so, but they're not the ones voting on it. You can't use an intermediary. That's what the court said. You can't have a surrogate in there. Hey, your policy coordinators, for example, your policy advisors, you can't say, hey, go ask Commissioner A how he's going to vote on this and come back and tell me. And you're not supposed to be using intermediaries to do business, to do the work that you would do otherwise. And if you did it, it would violate the law. You can't use a third person to do it. Does that help? So even using me to go ask other commissioners how it works would be problematic. In the absence of a public meeting, how we go about doing business is, if we have to settle a case on the eve of and you guys aren't there and I need your authority, I'll contact Commissioner Shull. This is what we have. Will you give us authority? He'll say yes or no. I'll go to Commissioner West and ask him privately. I don't tell him. Commissioner Shull already said yes. I said, Commissioner West, how you do it? And I take all your votes and I'll go count them myself. If I got 3, I can get it done, or I don't get it done.
Yeah, and I raised this is really important, so it just, if you could indulge me for a moment here. And I just use you two for an example, your 2 positions as an example. But we used to do 2-2-1s. Gary's familiar with this. You're all familiar with this, in which it seems as though at times in the past, we were almost seems like we were solicited for where we stood on a particular matter, and which was shared, which probably shouldn't have been shared, right? So I just want to say that Gary's been very good about not allowing 2-2-1s. Even one-on-ones really presents the same opportunity for vote counting, so to speak, and advocacy thereafter or influencing thereafter. So I just wanted to just point that out. That's dangerous territory.
I would also like to point out the one-on-ones that I have been witness to are for educational purposes, that if something new comes, new proposals from any of our departments, it's an opportunity for each commissioner to ask questions that they don't have to ask in public, but they can still ask in public. So I look at one-on-ones as not for serial voting or deliberation, Commissioner Savas. I look at those as very educational opportunity for me. I don't know if you call them one-on-ones, but I use staff briefings a lot as chair as we're trying to set the agenda and move items forward in the county. So it kind of depends how you look at this, how you look at what's going on.
Yeah, I agree, Chair. I wasn't meaning to say that one-on-ones or briefings aren't appropriate. I'm just saying that when it comes to counting votes or sharing the outcome of those, as opposed to positioning, is where the danger territory is.
I don't know that I've even seen that when I've been here, that staff is coming in and trying to solicit my vote and/or tell me how the other commissioners are. I mean, I can tell. I can tell by comments made at this dais, for instance, whether a commissioner is going to support something or not. And I say it out loud, we need to move this forward. We need to move this forward, and it's because for the greatest good of the county. You know, we may have an internal objection to one or two, three, a couple items on a whole laundry list of stuff, but we can work through that usually, and the process allows us to do that. It's all about process, isn't it, Stephen?
It is, indeed. And I think your staff is very careful to making sure that this group and other electeds don't run afoul of any of those things. So we're careful and controlled. Like I said, sometimes it feels like we're interfering, but we're really only doing it for your own good and the good of the organization itself. Also, serial deliberations could take place by way of email. One went out yesterday, and Gary Schmidt pounced right on it, saying, please don't do this. And it goes out to all the board, and if you were to hit reply all and say, I like this idea, or let's make it 5,000, that starts a meeting, right? You're deliberating on something outside of public purview with no agenda, no notice, and things like that. So by way of email, reply all can be difficult and challenging. That's why I will send out something to you and saying, if you have a question, email it to me directly. That way I hear from one of you and I can communicate with you fine without violating the public meeting law. I will point out that there is legislation proposed for this upcoming session which will temper the Handy ruling and incorporates it into the public meetings law that will allow for a certain type of meetings and whatnot. It's not as strict as the Handy decision. So it's going to loosen up some of the requirements of public meeting law, but that is not in effect yet. That is only a proposal. But if it does, and I'm sure it's part of the 1,600 bills that you were talking about earlier. I'm sure it's in there.
Commissioner West has a comment.
Of course.
And thank you for helping me get up to speed on this. I know we talked about it previously. If I'm in the office and I'm just like, gosh, I'm struggling with this thing that we're looking at this bigger, not even like a certain ordinance or a certain thing that we're going to vote on, and maybe it's something down the pike, but I'm like, I'm talking to staff, or I'm sitting with one other commissioner, and I'm just like, hey, can you? And I'm not counting votes, but I'm just trying to do the county business and wrap my brain around something and work it out, right? So that's not the same as daisy chaining. I guess it seems like it is hard to totally, it's almost impossible. It's like almost impossible to really, are we daisy chaining or not daisy chaining when I'm just trying to.
You're not getting votes, but you are discussing county business, a quorum of you. You can certainly discuss it with one of your colleagues all day long. Two of your colleagues, if it's county business, if you're talking about the war in Ukraine or something along those lines, five of you could get together and discuss those things. You could talk NCAA, you could talk governor's emergency declaration. That's not necessarily county business. If you start coming to say that, what about this ordinance change that we're happening? What about this appointment we're about to do? If you're talking with more than one and you're talking to three at the same time or over the course of time, that could be construed as daisy chaining and/or violating public meeting law. Yeah. So if there's three of you in the elevator talking county business, that would be your public meeting right there. When the prior board here had three, one of the incentives to go to five was to avoid that very situation, because they'd have two people in the elevator and they said, oh, that was a heck of a meeting, wasn't it? And people would say, no, no, no. So when you have five, you can dilute it a bit more, so two of you can speak freely and candidly about an item without violating public meetings law. But you could certainly talk to Commissioner Scholl about an issue, go down the hall and talk to Commissioner Savas about the same issue. Does that help?
It's yes and no. It's still super squishy, but like yeah, okay.
That's fine. We're going to go ahead and move on. You can talk to him privately later about that
Perfect. Yep.
if you have more questions. Thank you.
One-on-one is perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, once you get three, though, three's a magic number. Yeah, and so if you're silent, that's fine. If you're out on a site visit, that's fine. If you're at an association meeting, if you're at AOC, that's fine. You can all be there. There are carve-outs in the law to allow for those types of sessions, those types of meetings.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're also subject to the public records law, and so any document you have that concerns county business, whether it's on a sticky note, whether it's on an email, whether it's on a yellow pad, a spiral, or it is in your computer, if it concerns county business, it is a public record. If it's your medical report, your medical appointment, that's not county business, that's personal. If it's your wife's anniversary, that's not county business, that's personal. If it is on county business, like I said, a sticky note, it's a public record. Whether it's subject to disclosure is the second part of the analysis, and there are 60 exemptions and conditional exemptions to the release of public records: security plans, private information, personal information, discipline records, housing authority enrollment, the list is long, donations to OSU, the list is long. So we analyze it in a two-step process. Anything attorney-client's not subject to disclosure unless it's over 25 years old, but that's a different point. So consider it if it's concerning public matter, the county's business, and it's on a document, it is a public record. It should be retained. It should not be destroyed. It should not be disposed of unless it's memorialized somehow. If it's in an email, you're safe. We have an email server that holds on to our emails for an extended period of time. Yes, Commissioner?
Text.
What's that?
Text.
Text.
Text, especially text during meetings or text during work sessions.
Oregonian headline, Ted Wheeler loses all his text messages because his phone got wiped clean or whatever, because it wasn't recording it. It was supposed to be. Text messages, to the extent they concern county business, I text with Gary. I keep mine indefinitely. It's county business. It would be a public record. Yes, text would be, they would qualify. That's our struggle. The law really has difficulty keeping up with the technology, right? Because Microsoft Teams, how do you record that stuff? It's just a little thing that pops up on your window. How do you record all those things? I Microsoft Team with Tony during board meetings about the next agenda items and things along those lines. Yes, they're all supposed to be retained and kept for at least probably 2 years on those things, maybe even longer. Yeah, so that's our struggle, text messages, and whether it's a personal phone or a county-issued phone. If it's a personal phone and it's county business, that is a public record. Yeah, long arm of the public records law, absolutely. And so just be mindful of the fact, if it's county business, keep it here, just save it here and whatnot. Anytime you use county email, it's saved in our archive. So even if it's deleted and double deleted, it's still saved in our remote servers in those regards. We have where we get public records requests on the regular. Gary gets them, I get them. A lot of them are vetted through us. If they concern you, it comes through our office. And there's a form that we have. It's compliant with state law. We have certain requirements. We have to acknowledge it within 5 days. We're supposed to provide the document within 15 days unless we give extenuating circumstances. We typically try to capture staff time fully loaded, which is their insurance and their other benefits, at the hourly rate. so we're not doing the public's work for them. And there's a waiver component if it serves the public interest to release this information. Recently, Gary released one where people were asking about reports we had on attacking electrical substations. He determined that that was in the public interest because there was a reporter who was going to write about it, and he released those without incurring the cost. It was $85. So, and that was, he rarely does it, but he has the authority to waive the public records fee request, which is infrequently done, but there is a ability to do that, and he does it very judiciously. There's, again, violations of a public records law is a lawsuit. It could be a attorney fee recovery. If we lose it, we seldom end up in court on those things. If it's an elected official and you refuse a public records request, the requester, if they disagreed with it, would have to file a suit in Clackamas Circuit Court. If it's just the county rejecting it, it goes to the district attorney's office. So there's two different avenues there. If the sheriff rejects a records request, they would have to sue the sheriff to get those. So you also have Oregon ethics law that's applicable to you as well. And they have their own website, they have their own training, they have their own list of investigators that are able to answer any questions you have. That deals with honoraria, that deals with conflicts of interest, that deals with nepotism, using your position for personal gain or avoiding financial detriment. Those are all ethics requirements, and there's a host of opinions that they have. If you have initial questions, I'd say you can certainly ask them of our office, and we'll try to guide you through that process. We're not the final arbiters on that, though. It is the Ethics Commission or the investigators there. So if we have sticky questions, we'll typically aid you in referring it to the Ethics Commission to get an answer from them. It takes a long time. They issue formal opinions. Sometimes they have a safe harbor provision. Sometimes they don't. But the things to remember is that you're not to use your position for your own financial gain or that of your siblings or family, or to avoid financial detriment by using your particular position. That's not just you. That's Gary, that's Tony, that's me, that's every other 3,100 county employees. They're all subject to the same thing. You can't use this, hey, I want my permit, I work here, or something along those lines. You can't use your position for furthering your own personal gain or that of friends and family and things along those lines. You also have limits on gifts on matters that are before you or are soon to be before you. So if somebody gave you a gift that you don't even, from China, right? We had the Chinese delegation, you can accept those gifts. If you have the Airbnb people, though, come and give you gifts and you have a ST, short-term rental ordinance on the books or on your horizon to deliberate, you wouldn't be able to accept that gift, only up to $50, and you'd have to report on it. So there's also conflict of issues presented on occasion, conflicts of interest, and you have potential and actual. And a potential one where, could it affect me financially or my family, hurt me or benefit me? Could it? Yeah. And if it could, then you have to announce there might be a potential here because I have a rental that's close to that land use designation and it could affect it. I don't know. You disclose it, you announce it at the beginning of the conversation, and you're still able to participate in the conversation and you're able to vote on the matter even. If you have an actual conflict, we're going to rezone this into R6 and you have 10 acres there and it's clearly going to benefit you or hurt you, you have to say, I have an actual conflict on this because this is going to hurt me or benefit me. I can't participate in the conversation and I can't vote on it either. There's an exception to that, and it's the rule of necessity, meaning if the whole board's conflicted out, you could still vote on it just to move the government's business forward one way or the other. So that's like a last-ditch effort on conflicts of interest. Sometimes you can avoid it. You still have to act on it, even if you all have conflicts on there. So,
Stephen, going back to honoraria and gifts, what about, you say you can't use your position to profit. However, commissioners will have outside jobs. That is exempt.
You could have an outside job. It would be difficult if you had a outside job as a asphalt paver and you frequently bid on county projects, or you did computer consultant and you bid on county projects. That's where it would get a little bit,
What about speaking fees?
where are you speaking?
I'm not, but let's say I was invited to speak at a conference, or any of us, and they volunteered to pay our travel and hotel and maybe, $100 speaking fees.
Yeah, you can do those, provided that the item doesn't have a legislative or administrative interest but in front of you. If the Airbnb people called you to come to Tampa and speak and stay here, and they knew that you had, I'm just using that as an example because we had a lot of those, right? And you had short-term rentals on your horizon, that arguably would be a conflict there. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
But if it's just, I'm going to go speak at the Hazelnut Growers Association, and they're going to pay for my night,
Right,
totally legit.
okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Mr. West?
Because I do have a job outside of the.
Well, you're not the only one.
Yeah, but I do. I work as a nurse at OHSU, and we can use that example. I'm totally fine with it. I don't know how much business the county would do with OHSU. Let's say OHSU wants to open a clinic in Clackamas County of some kind. Would I have to immediately would that be a conflict because they're also my employer?
In an abundance of caution, what you would do is say, I work at OHSU, and they're coming to county here, and I'm just going to say, I have a potential one here. Just disclose it. It doesn't hurt you at all, and it's open, it's transparent. Commissioner Fisher used to do it quite a bit in the past on the,
Because she was an
The
attorney.
theater,
She
in the
was an
theater
attorney.
thing. I know there were some, parks,
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's also there's going to be times, especially in your land use hearings, you're going to be asked, have you had any ex parte contact with third parties about this particular application? We'll ask you that on the regular, on a Wednesday during a land use hearing, because that's part of the process. State law requires that we inquire with the governing body whether or not they have had ex parte contact, which is contact with an applicant outside of the formal quasi-judicial setting. So when you're sitting up here, you're in the quasi-judicial setting in a land use decision-making context. But if you're having contact with the applicant outside of this, you would say, yes, I talked to the applicant. He walked me through the property a week ago or 2 weeks ago. You just disclose it. It doesn't affect your decision-making, but you're just disclosing to interested parties that in fact has happened. And that's why we ask you that prior to you having land use determinations.
Mr. Savas, go ahead.
Oh.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, there's been a couple areas that have troubled me, and I've expressed this before, but with Commissioner West being new and even Commissioner Scholl to some degree, I'm not sure he's heard all of these things because this has been a long time since we've been able to talk about this in particular. And that is, number one, conflicts of interest or legal representation when amongst districts, counties, or between districts and counties and so forth, and the multiple hats we wear. And I've always argued that, perhaps a independent counsel for any of those districts might have an opinion that might be unique to that. I know that your office and your position, your primary role is to protect the county, right? And when protecting the county, might be foreseen or be compromised in protecting the district, the county would obviously be your number one responsibility, as less so for the district. I say that as a comment, as an observation. But more importantly, for example, if I'm getting back to public meetings law, if I'm a citizen within the lighting district, or I'm a citizen within ELED, and I want to come to a public meeting and hear my board speak, I'd say that if you want to do that in the last 2 years, your only opportunity was once a year at the budget meeting, because the lighting district doesn't meet any other time, nor the ELED, as an example. And this is something that we've talked about before. Gary's quite familiar with this, but there have not been regular meetings. And being a district person with a district background, it makes me awfully nervous that we are not sometimes at least have the appearance of listening or working in the best interest and doing all the things that any jurisdiction would do. And I think county service districts need to do a better job, and we have a number of them, those different hats. But I just want to, that's a statement. It's not really a question, but Again, I just think it's really difficult, especially on ELED issues which come up, or law enforcement issues, when someone sends me an email saying, geez, you know, I get more law enforcement protection in this city and than I do in the county, or my daughter does in that county, or in unincorporated. And, you know, I want to reply back, well, you know, geez, you know, you have the ELED, you have your daughter or whatnot lives in ELED, you do actually pay for that. Come to a regular board meeting. I can't tell them that because there is no regular board meeting for the ELED.
As a commissioner, it is well within your authority to recruit one of your fellow commissioners to schedule a meeting for the governing body of the ELED. That is well within your authority. If you want to
I had difficulty with that. Sorry for interrupting. I've had difficulty with that because that's being perceived as, you know, we're allowed to put something on the agenda, not call a meeting.
I would say you're the governing body of all of those districts, the ELED, NCPRD, and if the board wanted to call a meeting on sitting as wearing that hat for the lighting district and/or the parks district, they could certainly do that. It's well within the board's authority to do that.
I just want to flag that for today for my colleagues.
And I appreciate that. And I will say, to your conflict question about council representation, I agree. There could be situations in which there is a conflict, but you actually have to identify a conflict first. And having separate governing bodies over areas doesn't necessarily by itself raise that particular conflict.
I would say that last year's audit of the NCPRD and the results, which I would advise my newest colleagues to read, demonstrates that both of those issues I just raised have led to a number of those excursions.
Again, a board function, if the board wants to hire separate counsel for NCPRD or any other district, they certainly can. It can, yeah.
And you know I've tried.
Yeah, it's within your authority. Lastly, another thing that's applicable, not just to you, but to all county employees as well, is what we call electioneering. It is where you cannot, as a public employee, use your public time, public dollars, public spaces to advocate for or against a particular candidate, measure, initiative, referendum, national, local, state, or anything else along those lines. You can do it off-site. You can wear a pin, a hat, a button, but you can't say, hey, Gary, let's go make donations to this particular campaign or that particular campaign. You can't recruit your coworkers to do the same thing, and you folks can't do that with your staff or anyone else along those lines. I know you know that, but it's here as a refresher that you can't use your public position and you can certainly advocate for all you want from the dais and elsewhere, but you can't use staff to do it. And you're not supposed to be using county facilities for it either. And so
Commissioner West.
What's that?
Commissioner
Oh,
West.
You might have just briefly answered, what is that? You might have just briefly answered my question, but like, let's say we have an issue we're passionate about, maybe it's a ballot measure, probably, and we, as a board, are like, yeah, we all agree with that. Can we express that and say that the county supports this, we support this, please sign this petition, we love it? Or vice versa, we hate it, no, don't support that measure. Is there a fine, is that different than what you're talking? I'm not saying we're ever gonna do that, but like, is that different than?
You guys as elected can lobby on behalf or against any of your measures or any statewide measure or local measure. You certainly can as elected officials.
As
You
a matter of
can't.
fact, we have done that. We've been requested, for instance, in the past, Clackamas Community College put forth a bond. They sought the support of commissioners, and we did that because it was within the confines of what we can do.
Right, we can't do it. County employees cannot do it. In fact, once we refer the matter, if we help you draft the matter like we did the children's one you were talking about earlier, Commissioner West, we drafted it. Once we were done with that, we sent it to the clerk's office. We couldn't touch that. That's it.
Okay.
Our work is done because you can't use county staff to further that. So once it's been referred to the clerk, it basically is a political hot potato at that point, and we can't argue for and against or even work on it
We
at that
can't
point.
direct you to,
No.
right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Zach.
Yeah, you were mentioning, you know, and I don't disagree, but I just want to just point this out. It's a flag. It just troubles me, at least on the, it doesn't pass a sniff test, but you touched on it when you said you can't use county employee, but county facilities as well. And there have been I got two examples. One in which the county golf course facilities were used for a campaign event, and the Milwaukee Center was used for a campaign event, even recently. So apparently they're available for rent, and the last one I checked in with the administrator, and it is a policy to rent it out, but it's not a policy to draw the line where you can or cannot. But it is a public facility, and it just doesn't seem right that that would be allowed.
Your distinction would be paid for, though. And it's just like using county buildings. Can we allow certain, if you allow it to one, you have to allow it to others, right? But for rent, takes everything out of the equation. If they pay for it, they're allowed to use it as long as it's the same price as you would be charging everybody else. If you're charging the home builders the same price as the Democratic Party, then it's an authorized use.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just want to flag that.
Thank you. Go ahead.
That's all I have.
Oh, all righty.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you for your time.
Any questions or comments?
Very good. Mr. Madcourt, that was very educational. Thank you very much. One of the fun takeaways, a lot of people ask me, Commissioner Schell, how come you can't make Clackamas County a charter county? Now I can say to them, well, if we were a charter county, the Board of Commissioners could vote to impose a new tax on you. Right now, we can't. That should put that question to rest, right?
Depends on the
Unless it
charter.
said, if it's in the charter.
Yeah.
The hard part with the charter is the city of Portland's going through the struggle right now with it. They had the Charter Review Committee that put out this body of legislative changes that go to 12 commissioners, get rid of that form of government, have an appointed head, have all this other. If the Charter Review Committee puts it out there, the public has to vote on it. You don't get to decide whether or not that makes it to the ballot. So
You have no control over what the Charter Review Committee is going to do. Commissioners may refer something, or councilors may be thinking that we're going to get a certain end result, when in fact, we could get exactly the opposite.
Can backfire, for sure. Yeah. Very
Correct.
interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
This has been very informative.
nice.
I appreciate it very much.
you. Thank you for your time.
I read through the slides before we came today, and I looked forward to this presentation. And if you have questions or comments.
Slides are posted online, so I can share. Can I share those?
yes, of course, yeah. Yeah,
If they're
thank you.
online, they're available to anybody.
Okay.
Great,
Good.
thank
Thanks,
you very
folks.
much. Gary?
That is all for today, yes.
Seeing no further business before this commission, we are adjourned.